My name is Janine. I'm 58 years old, and for years, everyone, including my own family, laughed at my so-called tiny garden. When I say tiny garden, I mean a small patch of soil behind my old countryside house about the size of a two-car garage. But to me, it was never tiny. It was where my late husband, Mark, and I spent our evenings, where we laughed, argued, dreamed, and built a life. Every corner held a memory. Every bloom carried his touch. After he passed away 5 years ago, tending that garden became my comfort and my purpose. Most people didn't understand that. My daughter, Clara, and her husband, Derek, would visit occasionally, mostly on holidays. Derek always had something sarcastic to say. He'd look at my garden and smirk. "You could have grown something useful here, Janine. Maybe something that actually makes money." I'd laugh politely, though inside it stung. He always acted like my way of living was outdated, like I was some silly old woman wasting her days on weeds and dirt. Clara wasn't as harsh, but she rarely defended me either. She'd just say, "Mom, Derek's joking. Don't take it so seriously." But I knew he wasn't joking. Derek was the kind of man who measured worth in dollars and square footage. He came from a business background and worked in real estate development. To him, everything had a price tag. He'd tell Clara that my house and little yard were a gold mine if only I'd do something smart with it. Every visit, he'd suggest tearing down my home, selling the land, or letting professionals handle it. I'd smile, pour him more coffee, and change the subject. What Derek didn't realize was that Mark and I had been offered money for this land before. Developers had come knocking over the years, claiming it wasn't worth much now, but might be later. Mark always refused. He'd say, "Not yet, Janine. This place has more potential than they know." I trusted him, even if I didn't fully understand what he meant. Since his death, I'd kept the garden alive out of love and habit. Some days, I'd sit on the old wooden bench Mark built and talk to him as if he were still there. Other days, I'd just listen to the wind in the trees and think about how much he loved this place. The townspeople treated me kindly but condescendingly. They'd say, "Janine, you've done so well maintaining that little patch." Like I was a child showing off a school project. I'd just nod and thank them, pretending not to notice the pity in their smiles. One summer afternoon, Clara and Derek came over for dinner. I'd made roast chicken and baked bread, just like old times. As we sat on the porch, Derek looked over the fence, then laughed. "You know, this garden isn't even big enough to bury a secret, let alone build something valuable." Clara chuckled nervously, but I froze. His words hit me harder than he knew. Not big enough to bury a secret, if only he knew how wrong he was. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered something Mark had told me the night before he died. We were sitting in that same garden, and he'd taken my hand, his voice weak but deliberate. "Janine," he'd said, "promise me don't let anyone take this land from you. There's more to it than you think. When the time comes, you'll understand." At the time, I thought he was just talking sentimentally. But now, Derek's cruel little joke stirred a memory, one I'd buried deep. Mark had given me an envelope before he passed away, sealed and labeled with a note, "Open only if someone tries to take the garden away." That envelope was still tucked somewhere in my dresser, untouched all these years. I hadn't thought about it in so long. Until now. Inside me, something shifted. Derek's laughter echoed in my ears, but all I could think about was that forgotten envelope and the secret my husband might have left behind. I hadn't thought about Mark's mysterious envelope in years, not until Derek's words stirred something deep inside me. After Clara and Derek left that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the clock ticking loud against the silence. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the old oak dresser in my bedroom, where I'd tucked that envelope away years ago. My heart beat faster as memories started surfacing. I could still see Mark's tired smile as he pressed it into my hand, whispering, "Keep it safe, Janine. You'll know when you need it." I'd been too heartbroken to deal with it back then. When he died, I couldn't bring myself to touch anything that reminded me of him. The garden was my only exception because it made me feel close to him. But the envelope, I'd buried it beneath folded scarves and unfinished letters, pretending it didn't exist. Now, it called to me. Still, I hesitated. What if it was nothing but old bills or sentimental words? What if opening it shattered whatever comfort I'd built? I wasn't sure I was ready for more surprises from the past. Yet Derek's cruel mockery had awakened something stubborn in me. I wasn't going to let anyone treat my husband's memory or my home like a joke. I stood, walked to the dresser, and pulled open the middle drawer. My fingers brushed through old keepsakes until I found it, a yellowed envelope sealed with Mark's handwriting across the front. For Janine when the time comes. My throat tightened. I sat on the bed, holding it for a long moment before gently breaking the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, slightly creased with age. I unfolded it carefully, and my breath caught. It wasn't just a letter, it was an official document. At the top, printed in faded ink, were the words land deed. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I expected some kind of sentimental message, maybe instructions for something in the garden. But this was different. It had maps, measurements, and boundaries outlined in ink. My property line looked wrong. It stretched far beyond the small patch I thought was mine. The shaded area extended past the fence, over the grove of trees, even reaching the edge of the old road where developers had been working for years. I blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. But then I saw Mark's signature, his handwriting, steady and deliberate, right beside mine from decades ago. This was no fake. I spread the paper on the bed, running my fingers over the map, my pulse racing. If this deed was accurate, I didn't just own a garden, I owned several acres of land. Land that, based on recent town gossip, was now part of the new industrial expansion zone. My mind spun. Could Mark have known? Was this why he always refused to sell? He used to tell me, Janine, sometimes the smallest seed grows into the biggest tree if you're patient enough to wait. I'd thought he was being poetic, but now I wondered if he'd been literal. As the realization sank in, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Clara. Her text read, Mom, Derek wants to know if you've ever thought about selling your place. There's interest from a company. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding. Derek wasn't mocking anymore, he was circling. He must have caught wind of something about the upcoming land development. I typed back slowly, no plans to sell. Tell Derek I'm quite happy here. Then I folded the deed and tucked it into my purse. Something told me this wasn't the time to let anyone know what I'd found, not even Clara. Not yet. As I turned off the lamp and stared out into the night, the moonlight fell across my garden, bathing it in silver. My tiny garden, Derek had called it. But now I looked at it differently. It wasn't tiny, it was the gateway to something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the quiet night, Mark, what did you leave me sitting on? The map in Mark's envelope didn't match what I thought was my property, it was 10 times larger. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, my mind still buzzing from what I'd seen. The deed lay on my kitchen table now, its edges weighed down by a mug and my reading glasses. I stared at it over my morning coffee, tracing the lines again and again as if they might suddenly rearrange into something more reasonable. But there was no mistake. The boundaries stretched far beyond my fence, almost all the way to the new highway the county had been working on for the past year. I'd always assumed my land ended where the old oak trees began. Mark and I never ventured much beyond that area, except for the occasional walk. I remembered him once saying, "It's good land, Janine. One day it'll matter more than you think." Back then, I laughed it off, teasing him about sounding like a movie cowboy. But now, his words made perfect sense. The deed was dated 34 years ago, right around the time we bought the property. I realized that when the county did its modern zoning years later, no one must have updated or cross-checked these original records. Developers and neighbors had probably assumed the boundaries were smaller. In fact, it looked like even the town planning office had been working under that wrong assumption. My head was spinning with questions. Did Mark know how valuable this could become? Was this his secret way of protecting me from greedy people, or maybe from his own family? Whatever the case, I knew one thing. This was no coincidence. I was so deep in thought that I didn't notice the sound of tires crunching on gravel until it was too late. When I looked out the window, there he was, Derek, dressed in one of his spotless business shirts, holding a coffee cup, and walking up my porch steps like he owned the place. I quickly folded the deed and slipped it under an old gardening magazine just as he knocked. "Morning, Mom," he said with a smirk, the kind that always set my teeth on edge. "Hope I'm not too early. Thought I'd drop by and see if you needed any help around here." I almost laughed. Derek never lifted a finger around my home unless it benefited him. "That's kind of you," I said, pouring him a cup of coffee, "but I've managed this place just fine for years." His eyes wandered around the kitchen, scanning everything like he was taking inventory. "You ever think about how much this property could be worth?" he asked casually. My stomach tightened. "It's just my home, Derek. Not much to look at." He chuckled. "Well, maybe to you. But to people who know land, it's interesting. Especially with all that expansion going on down the road." I forced a smile, hiding my panic. He did know something. Maybe not the full truth, but enough to start sniffing around. "That so?" "I wouldn't know much about that," I said, trying to sound bored. His gaze landed briefly on the edge of the paper poking out from under the magazine. My heart skipped. "What's that?" he asked. "Just an old gardening plan Mark drew years ago," I replied quickly, covering it with my hand. He liked sketching where he wanted to plant things. Derek shrugged, pretending to lose interest, but I caught the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He finished his coffee, made a few more half-hearted jokes about my little retirement farm, and finally left. As soon as his car disappeared down the road, I locked the door and pulled the deed back out. My hands were trembling, not just from nerves but from excitement. Mark had left me something extraordinary, something that could change everything. Standing by the window, I looked out over the garden that had once seemed so small. The morning light poured across the grass, stretching beyond the fence, illuminating the trees, the hills, the land that was all mine. And as I whispered, "Mark, did you know all along?" the sound of tires returned this time, headlights glowing in the dusk. Someone else was coming up the driveway. It was Derek again, uninvited, with a grin that made my stomach twist. I hadn't even had time to gather my thoughts from the morning before Derek was back that same evening. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow across my porch when I heard the crunch of his car tires again. I didn't bother pretending to be happy about it this time. When I opened the door, there he was, standing with that smug grin, holding a six-pack of beer like it was some peace offering. "Evening, Mom," he said, too cheerfully. "Thought I'd stop by, maybe have a drink with you. I feel bad for teasing you earlier." I raised an eyebrow. "You? Feeling bad? That's a first." He laughed, brushing off my sarcasm. "Come on, I just want to make sure you're doing okay out here. Big house, all alone. You never know what kind of people might come snooping around." His tone carried an edge, one that didn't sit right with me. I gestured toward the porch chair. "You can sit for a bit, but I'm not much for drinking." We sat in uneasy silence for a few minutes. He opened a can and took a long sip, his eyes scanning the property like a hawk surveying prey. "You ever wonder who owns those woods behind your garden?" he asked, feigning casual interest. I lied smoothly. "Oh, I think it's just public land now, no one really uses it." He nodded slowly. "You sure about that? I heard developers have been looking to buy out areas around here for expansion. Could be a great opportunity." There it was, the real reason he'd come back. I forced a polite smile. "That's nice, but I'm not interested in selling." He laughed lightly. I know. You love this little patch of earth. But imagine what you could do with a big check in your hands. Move closer to Clara, travel, maybe even get a nicer place in the city." "I have everything I need right here," I said firmly. He studied me for a long moment, his expression sharpening, then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. You ever think Mark might have made a mistake holding on to this place so long? Land's just land, Janine. You can't take it with you. That was enough for me. I stood up and opened the door, making it clear our talk was over. Thank you for the concern, Derek. But my husband was a smart man. I trust his choices. He smirked, standing to leave. Sure thing, Mom. Just don't let nostalgia blind you. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. As he walked back to his car, I felt the weight of anger settle in my chest. He wasn't just being nosy, he was probing. I could practically see the greed gleaming in his eyes. The moment his headlights disappeared down the road, I went inside and grabbed my phone. There was only one person I could trust with this, Linda Myers, my oldest friend. She ran a small real estate office in town, and she knew everything about local property values. Linda, I said when she answered, I need you to come by tomorrow. There's something I need you to see, something Mark left behind. Her voice softened with concern. Of course, Janine. I'll be there first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts kept circling around Derek's sudden interest and Mark's foresight. It felt like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture forming. When dawn broke, I was already dressed and waiting at the kitchen table with the deed spread out again. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. At exactly 9, Linda pulled up in her little silver sedan. She walked in with her usual warm smile, but the moment I handed her the paper, that smile vanished. Her eyes widened as she read, her face going pale. Janine, she whispered, looking up at me with disbelief. Do you know what this means? Her voice trembled not with fear, but with the kind of awe that only comes before life-changing news. Linda's voice shook as she explained, Your land sits right on the path of the upcoming business park. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean, Linda? What business park? I asked, leaning forward as she spread the deed flat on the table. She pointed to the lower section of the map. This area right here, the county just approved a major development project 2 months ago. They're building a commercial hub, retail centers, and a tech facility. It's going to bring hundreds of jobs to the area. I blinked, trying to process her words. And you're saying my land? Janine, she interrupted softly. Your property isn't just near it, it cuts right through the proposed expansion zone. You own a large portion of what developers are scrambling to acquire. My hands trembled slightly as I looked at the map again. How much do you think it's worth? Linda exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. It's hard to say exactly without an appraisal, but we're talking millions, maybe several, depending on how the zoning shifts once the construction starts. Millions. I couldn't even wrap my mind around that number. All my life, I'd lived simply. My teaching job, Mark's pension, it was enough to get by. And here I was, sitting on a fortune hidden beneath my rose bushes and vegetable patch. I can't believe Mark never told me, I whispered. Linda smiled faintly. He probably wanted to protect you. You know how developers can be. He must have known the value would skyrocket once the county grew this way. I nodded slowly, a strange mixture of gratitude and sorrow washing over me. Mark had always been the planner, the one thinking 3 steps ahead. Even in death, he was still looking out for me. Linda leaned closer. Listen, Janine. You can't breathe a word of this to anyone yet. Not Clara, not Derek, no one. Once word gets out, people will start circling. Developers, lawyers, maybe even family. You need to protect yourself. Her warning sent a chill through me. You think Derek would try something? Linda's eyebrows rose. You said he's in real estate, right? Then yes. Men like that don't see people, they see opportunities. Keep quiet until we file a confirmation of ownership with the county. I'll handle that for you. I thanked her, relief mixing with anxiety. She promised to start the process the next morning and hugged me before leaving. The house felt unusually quiet after she left. I stood by the window, looking out over my tiny garden, though it didn't seem tiny anymore. The land stretched into the horizon, glowing under the afternoon sun, holding secrets even I had barely begun to understand. Just as I was beginning to feel a sense of calm, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Clara. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom," she said in her gentle voice. "Derek was thinking it might be good for us to come by this weekend. He says he's got a friend who's interested in country properties." My chest tightened. "A friend?" I repeated carefully. "Yeah, a potential buyer. He thinks it might be smart to just see what it's worth. No pressure, of course." I forced a laugh, though my mind was already racing. "That's sweet of him, but I'm not looking to sell." "I love it here, Clara." "I told him that," she said, her tone apologetic. "But he's persistent. You know how he is." I smiled to keep my voice steady. "Tell him I'll be here this weekend, and if he wants to visit, he's welcome. I'll even make pie." We hung up, and I sat down slowly. My hands were steady now. If Derek wanted to bring a buyer, I'd let him. Let him think I was still the naive, sentimental old woman. Because this time, I wasn't just going to defend what was mine, I was going to watch. Exactly what he planned to do. And something in my gut told me that the man he was bringing wasn't just a buyer. He was part of a scheme that was about to unravel right in front of him. I realized Derek wasn't just mocking me, he was scheming behind my back. Saturday came and the morning air was crisp and bright. I'd been up since dawn, sweeping the porch and watering the garden like it was any other day, though my heart raced beneath the calm routine. If Derek thought I was some harmless old woman with dirt under her fingernails, then that was exactly who I intended to be, at least for today. Right around 10, I heard the hum of an engine approaching. Derek's shiny black SUV rolled up the driveway, kicking dust into the sunlight. He wasn't alone. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out beside him, his shoes far too polished for a country visit. They looked like wolves in a chicken coop. "Morning, Mom," Derek called, wearing that fake smile of his. "Hope you don't mind we brought someone interested in seeing your little patch of paradise." I forced a cheerful tone. "Of course, Derek. Always happy to have company. Who's your friend?" "This is Mr. Brandt," Derek said smoothly. "He's a land consultant, helps families get a fair deal when they decide to sell." Mr. Brandt shook my hand, his grip firm and businesslike. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitlow. I've heard a lot about your lovely property." "Oh, I doubt that," I replied, smiling. "Most people around here think it's just a garden." They laughed politely, but I caught the flicker of greed in both their eyes as they scanned the horizon. Derek led the way toward the garden, gesturing dramatically as if he were already the tour guide to something that belonged to him. "You see, Brandt, this part here could be cleared easily," Derek said, pointing at my lilac bushes. "And the slope beyond the fence perfect for expansion." I followed, quietly, my hands folded in front of me, every word burning into my mind. I wasn't imagining it anymore, he was trying to sell my land right out from under me. Brandt squinted toward the edge of the property. "You said the acreage was small, correct?" Derek nodded. "Barely half an acre. Just sentimental land. We'll get her to sign cheap." My pulse thudded, but I kept my face serene. "Would you gentlemen like some lemonade?" I asked, cutting into their scheming. They both turned, startled. Derek quickly put on his smooth tone again. "Sure, Mom, that'd be great." I walked back to the house, letting the screen door slam behind me. Inside, I took a deep breath and whispered, "Oh, Mark. You were right about him." From the window, I could see them still talking, their heads close together. I pulled out my phone and texted Linda. "He brought a developer. Looks serious. We'll call after they leave." Then I grabbed 2 glasses, poured lemonade, and carried them out like nothing was wrong. "So," I said brightly, handing them their drinks, "you think someone would really want to buy all this?" Derek chuckled. "Mom, you'd be surprised. Even tiny properties can be valuable if you find the right buyer." "Oh, I don't know," I said, pretending to ponder. "Mark and I always thought it stretched further back than this fence." That caught Derek's attention. "Further back?" he repeated quickly. "Maybe," I said casually. But I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I looked at the papers. I saw him exchange a look with Brandt, subtle, greedy, calculating. That confirmed everything I needed to know. After an hour of pretending to chat about flowers and soil, they finally left, saying they'd be in touch. I waved from the porch, smiling sweetly until the car disappeared. Then I walked inside, locked the door, and exhaled. I called Linda right away. "You were right," I told her. "He's trying to sell. Behind my back. Then we move fast," she said. "I'll get the deed verified and registered properly under your name. That way, no one can contest ownership." When I hung up, I looked out the window at my garden again. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, the same land Derek had mocked and tried to steal. My hands clenched around the edge of the counter. "You want to mock my garden, Derek?" I whispered with a slow, cold smile. "You'll regret ever planting that seed." For the first time in years, I felt excited not for revenge, but for justice. The next few days moved like clockwork. Linda was a woman of action, and she wasted no time. Early Monday morning, she drove me to the courthouse to verify my land records officially. We met with a clerk who, after running the file number from the deed, looked up with wide eyes. "Mrs. Whitlow, this property is entirely under your name," he said. "There's no joint owner, no lien, no dispute. It's clean and valid." Those words were like music. A lifetime of being dismissed and underestimated began to crumble away in that moment. I wasn't just a lonely widow with a hobby garden, I was the rightful owner of one of the most valuable plots of land in the entire county. And now, it was legally sealed, protected, and registered in my name. When we left the courthouse, Linda turned to me with a grin. "Congratulations, Janine. You're officially untouchable." I laughed, feeling a spark of pride that I hadn't felt in years. "Untouchable," I repeated softly. I like the sound of that. But even as I felt the weight lift, another emotion took its place. Resolve. Derek wasn't going to stop easily. Men like him never did. They pushed until something or someone pushed back harder. So I decided to prepare. Quietly. Carefully. Linda introduced me to an attorney she trusted. A calm, sharp-eyed woman named Ruth Ellis. Ruth helped me set up a trust that would control any future sale or income from the land. The best part? Derek's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Instead, Clara was listed as the sole inheritor, with a legal clause ensuring her husband had no claim to it ever. "You're building a shield," Ruth explained. "Once we file this, no one can touch your property without your consent. Even if you passed away tomorrow, it would skip right over your son-in-law's hands." I thanked her, feeling tears welling in my eyes. Mark would have been proud. Meanwhile, back at home, I went about my days as if nothing had changed. I weeded the garden, baked bread, chatted with neighbors, and smiled when Clara called. But beneath that calm, I was building walls Derek couldn't see. By Thursday, Clara began to notice something different in me. She stopped by with groceries and watched me pruning the roses. "You seem lighter, Mom," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've been smiling all week." I smiled. "Maybe I just realized this garden still has a few surprises left." She laughed, but her eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Derek says he's been trying to call you. Did you block him?" "No," I said innocently, wiping my hands on my apron. "Maybe I've just been busy." Her phone buzzed then, and I caught Derek's name flashing across the screen. She silenced it quickly, her expression uneasy. "He's been acting strange lately," she admitted. "I think he's stressed about work." I wanted to tell her everything, but I held back. She wasn't ready, not yet. She still saw Derek through the eyes of love, not the shadow of greed that I saw. Later that evening, as I sipped tea on the porch, I watched the sunset and allowed myself a small, secret smile. Everything was in motion now. My land was protected, my legal rights secured, and Derek's scheming days were numbered. But my peace didn't last long. The next afternoon, Linda called. Her voice tense. "Janine," she said, "you're not going to like this. Someone just filed a fraudulent ownership claim at the county office. They used a forged signature, your name." I froze, gripping the phone. "Who?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It was Derek." I saw the paperwork before they flagged it. He's trying to take the land by deception. My pulse pounded in my ears. I stared out at the rows of flowers Mark and I had planted years ago, now swaying gently in the breeze. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then, in a voice calm and cold as steel, I whispered, "He just declared war." Because now, it wasn't about the garden, it was about respect, and I wasn't about to let Derek steal either from me ever again. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anger. I sat frozen for several seconds after hanging up with Linda. Derek had forged my name. My son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my home, fed at my table, trusted with my daughter's happiness, had actually tried to steal my land through fraud. The betrayal was so sharp it left me breathless. When I finally found my voice, I called Ruth, my lawyer. "He forged a document," I said. "He's trying to take the property." Ruth's tone turned firm and professional. "Do you have proof?" "Linda saw the paperwork at the county office," I replied. "It's got my name but not my signature." "Then we move fast," Ruth said. "I'll have my assistant pull the document. We'll file an affidavit to invalidate the claim before it even hits the system. He won't get away with this." True to her word, Ruth acted within hours. By that evening, she'd emailed me scanned copies of Derek's forgery. The signature was laughably off, slanted, rushed, nothing like my steady cursive. But still, seeing my name faked in his hand made my stomach turn. When Clara called that night, I nearly didn't answer. I didn't know how much she knew, but the moment I heard her soft, nervous voice, I realized she was innocent in this. "Mom," she said quietly, "Derek's been acting strange. He's spending late nights on his computer, whispering on calls, saying things don't concern me. I feel like something's wrong." I took a deep breath. "Clara, listen to me carefully. Has he mentioned anything about my property?" A pause. He did. Yesterday, he said something about helping you make the right decision before it's too late. I thought he meant you were getting old and stubborn again." My chest tightened. "Sweetheart, Derek isn't helping me. He's hurting me. He forged my signature on legal papers. He tried to claim my land as his." I heard her gasp. "No, that can't be true." "I wish it weren't," I said softly. "But I've seen the proof." Silence filled the line for several seconds, and then I heard her voice break. "Oh my God, Mom. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told her gently. "You trusted your husband. I did too once. But now, it's time to stop trusting him." When we hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The sadness that had weighed me down for so long began to harden into resolve. I wasn't a helpless widow anymore. I was a woman with power, knowledge, and evidence. The next morning, Ruth met me at the courthouse. Together, we filed a formal complaint and nullified Derek's forged claim. We also requested an investigation for attempted fraud. The clerk who processed the paperwork recognized Derek's name immediately, apparently. He'd been in there more than once asking about my deed. By afternoon, it was official. My land was safe, and Derek's little stunt had been caught red-handed. But I wasn't finished. No, not yet. That evening, Clara came over, eyes red from crying. "I confronted him," she said quietly. "He denied everything at first, said it was a misunderstanding, that he was only checking something for me. But when I pressed him, he went quiet." "Let him talk," I said. "The more he speaks, the deeper he digs his own hole." She nodded tearfully. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I can't believe I married someone like that." I hugged her tightly. "We'll handle this together. Just promise me one thing, don't warn him that I know." She agreed, and after she left, I sat alone on the porch, watching the moon rise above my garden. The same land Derek once mocked was now his obsession and his undoing. But just as I began to relax, a faint noise carried through the open window. A voice. Derek's voice. He was outside somewhere, talking on the phone. I crept closer to the window, heart pounding. His words were low, hurried, but I caught them clearly. She'll sell any day now. Once she signs, we move fast. My breath hitched, fury rising in my chest. He still thought he could outsmart me, but little did he know. The next move was already mine. He thought I was his pawn, but I was quietly moving my own pieces. The next morning, I woke up with a calm, steely purpose. I wasn't going to wait for Derek's next move, I was going to outplay him completely. For years, he had looked down on me as some sentimental, harmless old woman with a shovel and a dream. But that very underestimation was going to be my greatest weapon. Over breakfast, I called Ruth and Linda and told them I was ready to take the next step. "We'll sell the land, but on my terms," I said. "And I want everything signed, sealed, and protected before Derek even realizes what's happening." Linda chuckled approvingly. Now that's the Janine I remember. Within 2 days, she arranged meetings with 2 serious developers from the city, legitimate men who offered full price, no tricks. We met quietly in her office, not in my home, to avoid any chance of Derek catching on. I sat across the table, hands folded, as they explained the deal. "Mrs. Whitlow," one said, respectfully, "this property is a gold mine. Once construction begins, its value will double again. But even now, what we're offering is fair, very fair." It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. My heart raced, but I stayed composed. "I accept," I said simply. "But I want a portion donated to the town for something meaningful. My husband loved this community." Linda smiled proudly. The developers agreed without hesitation. Within 48 hours, the contract was drawn up, the deed transferred, and the funds moved into my new trust account, secure, private, and entirely beyond Derek's reach. Clara's future was protected. My husband's legacy was preserved. And Derek's entire scheme had just crumbled before he even realized what I'd done. By the weekend, I felt lighter than I had in years. I tended my garden like usual, humming softly as the autumn sun warmed my back. Every blossom felt like a quiet triumph. That afternoon, Clara stopped by. She seemed nervous, twisting her wedding ring as she sat beside me on the porch. "Mom, Derek thinks you're going to sell. He's been telling people that once you do, we'll be able to pay off his business debts." I smiled faintly. "Is that so?" She frowned. "He's been bragging, saying the land isn't worth much, but that he can convince you to take a low offer. He even mentioned a date this Saturday. He told one of his friends, 'By Saturday, it'll all be mine.'" I felt a slow smile spread across my face. "Perfect," I said. Clara blinked. "Perfect?" "Don't worry, sweetheart," I told her gently. "Just be here Saturday morning. I'll handle everything." That evening, I met with Ruth again to finalize the last piece of my plan. She prepared a press statement about the sale and donation, something that would make everything public and undeniable. "If we release this at the right time," Ruth said, "Derek won't be able to spin any lies. He'll have to face the truth." I nodded. "Saturday morning," I confirmed. "I want everyone to see exactly what his greed cost him." The next few days were almost eerie in their calm. Derek didn't call, didn't visit. I assumed he was preparing whatever con he thought would win me over. I let him think he was still in control, let him dig his own grave one smug word at a time. On Saturday, just as the clock struck 10, Derek's SUV rolled up the driveway. He was dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase, his expression full of fake confidence. "Morning, Mom," he said brightly. "Ready to sign some papers?" I gestured for him to come inside, hiding the satisfaction rising in my chest. He had no idea that the signing he was about to witness wasn't the one he imagined. When he stepped into my living room, he froze. Sitting on my couch were 2 reporters, a cameraman, and Linda, smiling politely. "Good morning, Derek," I said sweetly. "I wanted you here for this. You should see what your mother-in-law's been up to." His eyes darted from the cameras to the legal folders on the table, and for the first time since I'd known him, Derek looked afraid. The look on Derek's face was priceless when he saw the cameras and microphones. He froze in the doorway, blinking rapidly like he couldn't quite process what was happening. The confidence he'd walked in with melted away instantly. What's all this?" he stammered, his voice cracking ever so slightly. I smiled pleasantly, pretending nothing was amiss. "Oh, I forgot to mention today's a very special day. I'm announcing something important. Please, come in. You wouldn't want to miss it." The two reporters, one from the County Herald, another from a local TV channel, were already setting up their microphones. Linda handed me a small stack of papers, the official sale documents and donation agreement. I stood behind my coffee table, my garden visible through the window behind me, and faced the small audience. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and calm. "As many of you know, my husband Mark and I have lived here for decades. This garden has been called many things over the years: quaint, sentimental, even tiny." I allowed a small smile, feeling Derek fidget behind me. "But what most people didn't know is that this little garden sits on land my husband believed in long before anyone else did. And today, I'm proud to honor his memory in a way that will give back to our community." Linda nodded to the cameraman. "I've officially sold the property to the Westbrook Development Group. The proceeds will fund scholarships for local students, and 5 acres will be donated to the city for a public park, one that will bear my husband's name, the Mark Whitlow Memorial Garden." The room erupted in applause. Even the reporters smiled warmly. Derek, however, went pale. "You sold it?" he hissed under his breath, his smile twitching at the corners. "You sold it?" I turned to him with a serene expression. "Yes, Derek, I did, and I made sure the proceeds are safely managed in a trust. Clara's future is secure, and so is mine." One of the reporters turned toward Derek. "You must be proud, sir," she said brightly. "Your family's land will become a local landmark." He tried to compose himself, forcing a shaky laugh. "Oh yes, of course, I'm very proud. My mother-in-law and we worked on this together." That was his mistake. I looked straight at the cameras. "Actually, I handled this myself," I said clearly. "In fact, just a few days ago, someone attempted to file a fraudulent ownership claim under my name. Thankfully, the county caught it before it went through. It's a reminder that greed often hides behind a smile, but honesty always prevails." The room went silent. The reporters exchanged glances, sensing the tension in my voice. Linda, standing behind me, gave the smallest nod of approval. Derek's face flushed red. "Now wait just a minute," he snapped. "You're not seriously implying I didn't let him finish?" "If you have something to say, Derek, I'm sure the reporters would love a quote," I said sweetly. The cameras turned toward him, and he froze like a deer in headlights. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the reporters exhaled and said, "Mrs. Whitlow, that might have been the most dramatic press event I've ever covered." I laughed softly. "Well, life has a way of turning soil and exposing what's been buried, doesn't it?" When the cameras packed up and the reporters left, Clara stayed behind, her eyes glistening. "Mom, you knew," she whispered. "You knew what he was doing all along." "I had to," I said gently. "You can't stop weeds from growing, but you can make sure they never choke the flowers." She smiled weakly, wiping a tear. "I'm sorry for doubting you." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told her. "Sometimes people have to show you who they are before you can truly see them." By nightfall, the story had already made its way online. Local widow outsmarts, fraudulent developer, donates land to town. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages of congratulations and curiosity, but I ignored them. I sat on the porch, sipping tea, watching the lights of the town shimmer in the distance. Then I heard its tires screeching against gravel, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Derek's voice sliced through the quiet night, thick with rage and alcohol. "You think you can humiliate me like that?" he shouted. I didn't flinch. I simply reached for my phone and dialed 3 numbers. Because this time, I wasn't going to argue, I was going to end this once and for all. The man, who mocked my tiny garden, was now screaming at my gate, red-faced and desperate. I stood on my porch, phone in hand, listening to Derek's drunken voice echo through the night. The words were slurred, but the fury was crystal clear. "You think you're better than me, huh? You think you can make a fool out of me in front of everyone?" he yelled, gripping the iron gate with both hands and shaking it violently. My porch light illuminated his face, flushed, wild-eyed, and broken. Gone was the smug businessman who used to strut around in designer shoes. This was a man cornered by his own greed. "Go home, Derek," I said firmly, keeping my voice level. "You've done enough damage. You ruined me," he spat. "That land was supposed to save me. He stumbled, catching himself on the fence. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, my tone calm and cutting. "It was my land, my name on the deed, my husband's legacy. You tried to steal it, and you got caught." He slammed his fist against the gate, making me jump slightly. "You think you can call the cops on me? You think anyone will believe some old lady over me?" "I already did," I said quietly. He froze, the words sinking in just as red and blue lights appeared down the road. 2 police cars rolled up slowly, the flashing lights bouncing off the dark trees. Derek turned toward them, panic flashing across his face. "Mr. Collins?" one of the officers called. "We received a report of trespassing and harassment." "She's lying," he shouted, pointing at me. "She's setting me up. That land was supposed to be mine." The officer didn't even glance at me. "Sir, please step away from the gate." Derek ignored the warning. "You don't understand. She tricked me." Before he could finish, the officers stepped forward and took him by the arms. He struggled weakly, but they guided him toward the cruiser. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace," one said. As they loaded him into the car, Derek's eyes met mine through the flashing lights. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice raw with humiliation. "I already regretted trusting you," I said softly. The car door slammed shut, and the sound echoed like final punctuation on the nightmare he had created. When the officers drove off, I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the quiet. The garden was still, the air heavy with the scent of wet soil and night-blooming jasmine. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. Clara arrived half an hour later, her eyes red and swollen. "I saw the police lights," she whispered. "Is it true?" I nodded. "It's over, honey." She broke down, burying her face in my shoulder. "I can't believe he did this. I thought he loved me." I stroked her hair gently. "He loved money, Clara. You were just part of the picture that made him look respectable." We sat together on the porch swing until her sobs quieted. Then she looked at me, determination in her eyes. "I'm done. I'm filing for divorce." I squeezed her hand. "Good. You deserve peace, not partnership with poison." The next morning, news of Derek's arrest spread quickly. The local papers ran with the headline, "Man Arrested After Attempted Land Fraud Scandal." The same reporters who'd attended my announcement the day before now called for comments. I politely declined. I didn't need to say a word, the truth was already out there. Neighbors began stopping by, leaving baked goods and cards of congratulations. "You showed him, Janine," one woman said with a proud smile. "You showed all of them, but I didn't feel triumphant, just free. Free from mockery, free from deceit, free from the shadow of Derek's arrogance." That evening, I met Linda in town to sign the final documents confirming my donation to the community park. "He won't be able to touch a penny thing now," she said as she handed me the final copy. I smiled, tracing my husband's name where it would soon hang on the park's entrance. "It's funny," I said. "He thought this garden was a joke, but it ended up being the one thing that destroyed him." As the sun dipped below the hills, I drove home, the fading light washing the land in gold. My garden looked peaceful again, strong, proud, and untouchable. And just when I thought the story was finally over, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Ruth. Her voice was calm but curious as she said, "Janine, you might want to sit down. We just uncovered another document, something your husband left behind." Mark's final letter changed everything I thought I knew about the land and about him. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, staring at the small, weathered envelope Ruth had delivered. My hands trembled as I turned it over. My name was written across the front in Mark's familiar handwriting, steady, careful, the way he used to write our grocery lists. Beneath it was a note, faint but legible, "For Janine, when the garden is safe." My throat tightened. Somehow, even after all these years, Mark's words could reach across time and touch me like he was still here. I took a deep breath and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter and a small brass key. The paper was yellowed with age, but his handwriting was as clear as the day he wrote it. "My dearest Janine," it began. "If you're reading this, it means the garden and the land it sits on has faced the storm I always feared. I know you, my love. You would protect this place with everything in you, just as I would." I blinked back tears and kept reading. "What you may not have known is that when we bought this land, we didn't just buy the house and garden. I arranged a separate trust, a private ownership deal to ensure that no one could take this property from you, even if the paperwork ever got lost or challenged. The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at Ridgeview Bank, under your name. Inside, you'll find copies of the original contracts and an appraisal that might surprise you." I set the letter down for a moment, my heart pounding. All this time, he'd been thinking ahead, protecting me, even from beyond the grave. The letter continued. "I knew one day people would see only dirt and fences. But I wanted you to see what I saw, the foundation of our life. The roots of our love. This land will always be worth more than money. It holds the story of us. By the time I reach the last line, I trust you'll know when it's time to share its real worth with the world." I was openly crying. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered, "Oh, Mark, you always knew." That afternoon, I drove into town and used the brass key at Ridgeview Bank. Inside the small safety deposit box were 3 documents neatly stacked and sealed in plastic. A copy of the land's original purchase agreement, a map confirming its full boundaries, and a certificate from an appraiser dated 20 years ago. Even then, the value was staggering. But the last item in the box caught my breath, a photograph. It was an old snapshot of Mark and me, sitting on the garden bench surrounded by wildflowers, our hands clasped. On the back, in his handwriting, were 5 simple words: "The real treasure is you." When I got home, I placed the photo in a frame and set it on the windowsill overlooking the roses. The same ones he'd planted with his bare hands all those years ago. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its secret for so long. Clara came by later that evening, her face still tired from everything that had happened, but her eyes softer. I showed her the letter and the photograph. She read every word in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He really thought of everything," she whispered. "Yes," I said quietly, smiling through my tears. "He was always planning for the future, even when I didn't understand it." We sat together, watching the last rays of sunlight spill across the garden. The land wasn't just dirt anymore, it was legacy, love, and protection all woven together. And just as I was beginning to feel peace settle over me, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Whitlow, this is Mayor Halstead. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss something important about your land donation." I looked out at the glowing horizon and whispered, "Well, Mark, it seems your garden isn't finished surprising me yet." When the mayor showed up at my doorstep, I thought I was in trouble again. The next morning, I put on my best blue blouse, the one Mark always said made my eyes sparkle, and brushed my hair with more care than usual. I didn't know why the mayor wanted to see me, but after everything that had happened, I'd learned to expect surprises. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. Mayor Halstead stepped out, a tall man with a kind face and a neat gray suit. He carried a folder tucked under his arm and greeted me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me. I know it's been quite a few weeks for you." "That's an understatement," I said with a soft chuckle. "Please, come in. I've got coffee brewing." We sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd once hidden Mark's deed from Derek. The mayor glanced around, admiring the sunlight spilling across the room. "Beautiful home," he said. "You can feel the history here." I poured him a cup and sat across from him. "So, what can I do for you, Mayor?" He opened the folder and slid a few papers toward me. "It's actually what we would like to do for you," he said. "After your generous donation, the City Council met to discuss plans for the new public park. The land you gifted will not only provide green space, it's positioned perfectly for community use, and the town owes you a debt of gratitude." I smiled modestly. "It's what Mark would have wanted. He loved this place more than anything." "That's exactly why we're here," the mayor said, his tone brightening. "The council unanimously voted to name the park after your late husband the Mark Whitlow Community Garden and Nature Reserve." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and tears pricked the corners of my eyes. "You're naming it after him?" He nodded warmly. "Yes, and we'd like to host a dedication ceremony next month. The town wants to celebrate not just Mark's memory, but your generosity and courage. You've been through a great deal, Mrs. Whitlow, and yet you still chose to give back." I pressed a hand to my heart, trying to steady the rush of emotion. "He'd be so proud," I whispered. "He always said the land was meant for more than us, for everyone." The mayor smiled. It seems he was right. He stayed for another hour, discussing details about the event and the park's future plans. There would be flower gardens, walking paths, even a small pond restoration. I felt something blooming inside me again, a quiet joy that had been buried under grief for too long. After he left, I sat by the window, staring out at the familiar stretch of green. I imagined families walking there, children laughing, couples holding hands beneath the same trees Mark had once planted. His dream had become something bigger than both of us. Later that afternoon, Clara came over to help me plan for the ceremony. She was stronger now, more confident since separating from Derek. "Mom, everyone in town is talking about you," she said with a proud smile. "They're calling you the woman who turned betrayal into beauty." I laughed softly. "That's kind of them. But really, it was Mark's foresight. I just followed his path." She squeezed my hand. "Still, you did it. You stood up for yourself, for us, for him." We spent the evening sorting through old photo albums to find one for the dedication display. The pictures showed a lifetime of memories: Mark planting the first rose bush, me laughing beside him, Clara as a little girl holding a watering can almost as big as she was. As the sun dipped below the trees, we carried the albums outside and sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance over the garden. The air was peaceful, the kind of peace that comes only after surviving a storm. Then, as I looked toward the road, something caught my eye: a shadowy figure standing by the fence, half hidden by the trees. My heart gave a small jolt. Even in the fading light, I recognized that tall frame, the way he stood with his hands shoved into his pockets. It was Derek. He didn't move closer or say a word, just watched for a moment, expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I sat frozen, the photo album clutched to my chest, wondering if that fleeting moment was his silent goodbye, or the calm before another storm. For a moment, I feared Derek might try to ruin the moment, but instead, he just turned and walked away. That image of him standing by the fence haunted me through the night. I barely slept, waiting for a knock on the door that never came. When dawn finally broke, the soft light spilling through my curtains felt like a gentle reassurance that the worst had finally passed. Derek was gone literally and figuratively, and I was still here, stronger than ever. The following weeks passed in a peaceful rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The construction crews began clearing the donated land for the community garden and park. Every morning, I'd step outside with my tea and watch the workers measure and plan, the sound of laughter and machinery blending into something that felt alive. For decades, this land had been underestimated, just like me. Now both of us were finally being seen for what we truly were: resilient, valuable, and full of growth. Clara started visiting more often. Without Derek shadowing her every move, she was lighter, freer. She'd laugh more easily, her voice filling the house with warmth again. She found a new job, managing the logistics for the park project, a full-circle moment that made me smile every time I saw her clipboard in hand. One afternoon, as we watched the workers plant the first row of trees, she said, "You know, Mom, I think Dad would have loved this. It feels like him, doesn't it?" I nodded, my heart swelling. It does. He always believed this land had a purpose. I think he'd be proud that it's finally being shared. Linda joined us later that day, carrying her usual stack of paperwork and that knowing grin of hers. "The park's officially breaking ground next month," she said. "And the mayor wants you to give the opening speech." I laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't know about speeches. I'm better at planting than talking." "Janine," she said firmly, "you've earned this. Tell them your story. The real one." So, on the morning of the dedication ceremony, I stood on a small wooden platform facing a crowd of smiling faces: neighbors, reporters, city officials, and families. A large sign behind me read, "The Mark Whitlow Community Garden and Nature Reserve." The sight took my breath away. I adjusted the microphone and began softly. "When my husband and I first planted flowers on this land, people called it a tiny garden. But what they didn't see was that it wasn't about size, it was about love, patience, and faith in what something small could become." I looked out over the crowd, spotting Clara near the front row, beaming with pride. Linda stood beside her, clapping as I continued. For a long time, I let people mock what they didn't understand. But this place, this land, was never just soil and seeds. It was a promise. A promise that no matter how small something may look, it can hold unimaginable value if you nurture it. The audience applauded, and I felt tears slip down my cheeks. My husband saw what others couldn't. He believed this land would one day bring people together, and now, it finally has. When the ceremony ended, the mayor unveiled the park's plaque. My husband's name gleamed in gold under the morning sun. People cheered, cameras flashed, and I felt the kind of peace that can only come from closure. But as the crowd began to disperse, my eyes caught movement at the edge of the trees. For a brief second, I saw Derek again standing far away, half hidden behind a line of oaks. He wasn't shouting or angry this time. He just stood there, watching. Our eyes met across the distance. I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away without a word. And just like that, the last shadow lifted. Weeks later, the park opened to the public. Children's laughter filled the air, birds nested in the new trees, and couples strolled through the walking paths at sunset. I spent my afternoons tending to the original garden, which still bloomed behind my house, a living memory of where it all began. One evening, I sat on the old wooden bench Mark built, surrounded by roses and lilacs. The sky blazed with orange and pink hues as I whispered, "You were right, Mark." It was never tiny, it was everything. A gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers across the land. I closed my eyes, smiling, feeling him there with me, his laughter, his warmth, his legacy. And as the camera of life panned out, the once tiny garden stretched wide beneath the golden light, proof that even the smallest beginnings can grow into something extraordinary.